Ladies and gentlemen, good after evening, pre-evening, afternoon. Congratulations again to Invest Africa for this incredible event today. And it's quite interesting because the three panelists here have crossed their lives over my career. I think Baba, back then in Helios, when I was at IFC, the first investment, I was involved. Uche, when we were at Sovereign Wealth Fund, I was with GE, I was involved. And Amadou was our vice president at AFDB in charge of energy. We helped put together the energy strategy for 26 countries. So definitely the right people are here, and it's quite interesting. So we talk about changing the game. I have one question for you. Who has watched the movie Black Panther? Okay, could be more, okay. You've heard of vibranium? Okay. What if I told you that it's not a movie, it's a documentary? Why? Because literally vibranium is that element, that mineral, that helped this nation become the most advanced civilization on the planet. Africa literally sits on tons of vibranium in different forms, from human capital to mineral capital, etc. The key issue is how to harness it, right? So as we're talking about changing the game, it reminds me, I was in high school and we did this visit and we went to Germany to, I think it was BMW. And at the time, as an adolescent, I didn't understand why everybody would wear a tie and a suit, right? So I asked the CEO of BMW, he told me, look, you can look at it as a game, right? Either you go and play the game, or you change the game and you create your own game. So my point to this, which is quite interesting, yes, I didn't wear a suit today. I stopped when I left the corporate world. But what is very interesting is that we are at a crossroad, right? Africa has $4 trillion GDP. Natural resources, $150 trillion, right? So how do you harness these resources in a context where most international nations, maybe except China, are running out of capital? So we're going to have to count on ourselves. We're going to have to create our own rules. We heard cassava technologies, etc. And what I believe personally is that we have, if you take gold, for instance, 1971, you could buy 1 kilo of gold with 1,000 naira. Today, the same kilo of gold is 230 million naira. So how do we work together and in leveraging those assets, in leveraging this capital? So the DFIs have been talking about monetizing. On the other hand, when you hear Larry Fink of BlackRock, he tells you that tokenization, who knows about tokenization here? A few, right? If you go to New York, you have 95% who know. And that might be our problem. We talk about leapfrogging, but we're still talking about the game of the past. If we combine AI and blockchain, literally, and when you hear Larry Fink, tokenization is where internet was in 1996. What does that mean? It's not just about natural resources, right? Think about intellectual property. 98% of the music consumed worldwide has African roots, yet Africa has only 1% of the revenue of the global music industry. If we could put a value and digitize it, whether it's intellectual property, natural capital, cultural capital, we create an amount of wealth that was never accounted for before. And I also heard today about, okay, looking for capital and doing this fund, etc. I'm a former IFC, former managing director of GE. I've learned one thing. We went a lot to look for capital in the wrong place. IMF says 60% of Africa's GDP is unaccounted for. It means that out of those, you have 4 trillion that is accounted for, and literally 6 trillion that could fuel our economy that we're not leveraging on. Today, technology allows it. If you combine fractionalization of ownership of assets, where local capital could participate, combined with international capital, you could mobilize $6 trillion to fuel that economy in what is today the single largest unified market on the planet. So to come back to that story about changing the game, I remember some of those on this panel didn't really understand 8 years ago when I said we need to go into the future. We need to leapfrog. We leapfrog mobile, we now need to leapfrog money. And mark my words, the financial system is going to change within the next 4 to 5 years max. Are we prepared? I'm not sure. What can we do to make it happen? And the point when you change the game is to leverage on technology to define new rules. And those new rules are set and aligned to what we have as wealth, and there are 7 forms of capital we can leverage on based on different ways on valuing them and trading together. And this is essential. So on those words, I would leave you with this quote from Einstein that says, insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. So I'm going to challenge the panelists today to help us think through how we could do things differently, not within the game, but by creating a whole new game based on our own rules and leveraging on our major strength to turn it not just into an advantage, but into a moat that could help Africa inspire, knowing that 7 out of 10 kids born in 15 years on the planet are going to be African. It's a responsibility that we have, and we have brilliant minds today that will help us think it through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mamadou, and welcome to this very last session of the day. It's only us standing between you and the cocktail reception later, so I hope we make this engaging. So I'm really pleased. I mean, this has been a fascinating day, and we had some really big topics and discussions here at the Guildhall. And I really want to throw this forward now, much like Mamadou said, and I'm really pleased to be joined by some of Africa's leading investors and strategic thinkers here. Mamadou has already introduced you. Amadou, Hott, Uche, Orji, and Babatunde Soyoye, thank you very much for joining me. I really want to get started with you, Amadou. Give me a concrete example of something that is game-changing, that has been game-changing for you in the past 2 years, or that you see change the game in the next 12 months ahead.
Thank you very much, Karin, and thank you to Invest Africa for organizing this. For me, there have been many, or at least several, I would say, events, initiatives, projects, programs that are game changers or potentially game changers. One is the investment of Vision Invest directly into Africa for the first time. Vision Invest is a Saudi investment holding company that has been already in Africa through aqua power, through desalination, renewable energy, gas to power, with tens of billions of dollars of investment. But for the first time, directly, we invested in Arise IIP. This is not to extract and export, but this is to invest in Africa's transformation. I think this is a game changer because the quantum of investment in equity is very big for the continent, and 2, this is to enable the transformation of African raw materials, mineral resources on the continent to create value and create jobs for Africa, and at the same time also work with an African champion to take that champion potentially globally, starting at least with Saudi Arabia and potentially in Central Asia, where Vision Invest is very strong. For me, that's a game changer. And what it can lead into is to attract more Saudi and Gulf capital on larger transactions when we have those bankable projects, large bankable projects ready. And for the future, for me, what I see as a potential really big game changer is if you are able to do a couple of things. One is to effectively mobilize the $4.5 trillion that Samaela mentioned this morning in terms of African capital that is being invested in majority overseas. If we can organize that capital and retain it on the continent. And then two, what can we do to drive that cost of capital down, cost of debt in particular? For me, those two things are game changers in the future.
Thank you very much. Uche, I want to come to you before we drill down into how we can unlock all of this. What's been your game-changing moment?
Sure, thank you very much. I think, and I'm going to just pick up on something regarding the cost of capital perception. I think we need to take a step back and look at it. There's obviously the domestic cost of capital issue, which the minister alluded to earlier. But there's also the external cost of capital, which I think is actually much better than we might think. And I say that because if you think about, say, 7 years ago, during COVID, it was a wider spread at seen compared to maybe 15 years prior between the average bond yield in Nigeria versus the US. Okay? During COVID, the spread was as wide as 10, 11%. Today, the US 30-year bond yield is 5%, and Nigeria 25-year bond yield is just under 8%. For me, the reflection of that is that the global perception of risk is starting to shift. And for the first time, I think, if you ask anyone to define the epicenter of risk, they will probably point to Africa. But today, we've seen what risk really is. If you live in the UAE, to your north is Israel, to your south is Strait of Hormuz, to your right is Iran. The world is starting to change its way of looking at Africa that doesn't have any of these choke points to deal with. I think the following two things. Number one is, a lot of that is not just a reflection of what's happening elsewhere, which partly it is, but a lot of it is also a reflection of what's happening internally. The plumbings of capital mobilization have been built, and are being built, and are being talked about. And I can speak to what happened when I was at the NSIA, and I see that starting to now begin to steamroll. And that's turning into things, for example, and I know it's been talked about a lot, the Dangote's project, but the thing that the bulk of that capital was mobilized locally across Africa, with African institutions playing a prominent role, something that we not have been able to have done 20 years ago, is for me game-changing. And that means we have the capacity, we have the infrastructure, we now have some of the plumbings to start to finance big transactions. Second thing that I think is happening is the size of tickets required now to have a seat at the table is different. To a moment when you could have a seat at the table with small sums. Today, the change that I see is that the numbers are getting big, and that's what's needed to transform Africa. So for me, short term, that for me is something that I started to observe. We've all observed, seen happen. But I think if you sit back and look for the next 10, 20 years, there is a certain assertiveness that I hope continues. I have seen what Ghana has done with the gold board. It's a 1.5-year institution that has transformed the management of gold reserves. You're going to see more of that across Africa. More assertive foreign policy around how we manage our resources, our natural resources. You're going to see more mobilization of domestic capital, and you're going to see larger ticket sizes for transactions. And that creates a template for me that says you're coming to Africa not because we're going to ask you to come and invest in a place, but because you want to take advantage of the opportunity. The final thing is the confidence with which we're defining our culture. You see that in music, you see that in arts. Now, that's not going to move the GDP in a big way, but that just says people are confident to stand on the world stage and speak about themselves in ways that they can define by themselves. So I see going for the next 10, 15, 20 years, a broad set of game-changing things happening in investments, in the way we view ourselves in the world, and I hope that translates to more political assertiveness across Africa. That's what I see happening.
Thank you very much. We clearly need to talk about how to get rid of the bottlenecks in mobilizing domestic capital. But Babatunde, I wanted to ask you, what's been your game-changing moment or trend that you are identifying at this point?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. So I think when you sit back and think about actually what one thinks the continent or countries in general need to take off, I think there's sort of three factors. The first, you need capital. I'll come to that in a second, and how geopolitics of today It's resulting in actually some interesting dynamics, things like Vision coming to invest in Africa, what we see now, the Asians, the Chinese, the Japanese, people are just diversifying themselves away from too long US into diversifying globally, and Africa is getting actually a material hearing and listening and bits of that capital that's coming out of the US. That's one. Second, I think we've got a bucket load, which is, I think, young, dynamic people, hardworking, driven, and opportunity. So we've got that in a bucket load. The third, I think, actually is where we're struggling with a lot is good leadership. Yep, leadership is across regulation, policies, global outlook, policies that drive wealth creation. People look across most of the continent. People are poor, but we've got land. You go to the Western developed world, people have got title and ownership of land, and they can use that to borrow money and create wealth. So I just think, I think the game changer of the sort of geopolitics changing from a unipolar world with all the money in the world going to one market, even money from Europe, from Asia, from everywhere went one way. And now capital is coming our way, and we see it. It's coming our way. We've all said it in different ways, the spread of risk, Vision Invest, and I've seen it as well. But I think what we need to figure out and fix, and we're starting to see improvements in it, is just our leadership. If we can crack that, Africa is going to be an 8, 9, 10% growing economy for the next few decades.
If you look at, so you've, in between you mentioned all of these things that can get game-changing moments, the ingredients that are needed, policy, technology, leadership, capital at scale, both domestic and from abroad. If I go to you, Uche, what is the single thing that you think you would like to see from policymakers that could supercharge the game-changing?
How much time do we have?
About 60 seconds.
Okay, now just, there are a couple of things. I think that is still the way we handle taxation that needs to change. And I speak as someone who's now starting to invest locally in Nigeria. You go to Lagos State, you have a long list of taxes you have to pay. That's got to change. You need to simplify it. It's not just so much about not wanting to pay, it is actually about the complexity of administration of those things. So to the extent that we can have a simplification of some of our tax codes, that'll be something that will help. Number two, and I'm going to pick up on what Baba said about title documents. Now, there are a few changes that have been made, and that continues to improve. But being able to make it easy for people to get through the necessary administration of licensing, these are things we need to improve on significantly. And for me, those are the two most important things that I think still remain a challenge for investors coming into markets. We've done a lot, obviously, and that's not to say we haven't done a lot, to be honest, but I still think if you ask anybody that is actually owning a business or investing in a business in these countries, across the board, there is still something that needs to be done about simplification, reduction of taxes across our system that I think, in many ways, and the funny thing, there was an old drama, I think, about why Africans tax themselves so much. And part of it is because there is this cycle that we found ourselves of, trying to fill the deficit, and we think that's, I'm speaking, that sounds like I'm talking about the UK, but where you just continue to tax yourselves in a manner that never really generates growth. I think we need to step back and think about that a little bit differently. And that is across asset classes, across income taxes, to simplify the code, make it easy for investors to come in. There's one thing, and then the final thing, obviously, is ease of moving money around, and we're starting to do that much more efficiently. But if you ask me for one thing, that is one thing that I think, as an investor and somebody who actually owns some businesses now, we are concerned about.
Do you get a sense that those conversations have taken more urgency given what's going on in the wider world, that we live in a very uncertain, in a very unstable backdrop? Are African policymakers, are reforms finding fresh and more momentum?
I mean, for me, what is extremely critical is consistency of policy, the reforms in the long run. What we tend to see is that a government would do well in terms of great reforms. For some reason, after 4 years or 8 years, they're out of power, another government comes in. It's like you're restarting afresh. And that is a major problem. And we've seen that in major economies on the continent. And if we could agree as policymakers, maybe through legislation or even through the constitution, to stabilize certain things, no matter who comes next, this path, we have to continue this path because it's been yielding results. You know, out of populism or just to say, I'm going to throw whatever the other did before, you know, I'm going to change things. And then that scares investors. If we could have that stability in the long run, I think we would do very, very well. And then second, really to improve the capacity of the governments. The capacity of government to deal with investors in a very swift, sophisticated, rational, and not emotional way to get the big transactions, the big ticket size done in a speedy manner. Because you cannot run after a government for 10 years to deploy your 500 million because you're going to go to another country. That is, I think, very important capacity within government. When I was in government, that was some of the major things I had to deal with from day one. Luckily, we managed to raise a facility from a foundation helping us attract talent in government and paying them private sector salary.
Babatunde, what does it look like from your vantage point? Speed, policy making, consistency?
It's good leadership. I just cut it all down to one thing. It's good leadership that's got stability in policy. But the question, I think, is a big one of how do you achieve that? It throws up many big existential questions. We look across the continent and the economies that are doing really well, and there's a lot of commonality in those economies, which is stable leadership, stable policies over a long duration of time. And it goes into just, yes, it could be a long, long discussion to go different way, but I think good policies, but not just stability of that.
Do you see a sense of urgency? Do you see a recognition that that needs to happen more?
Of course, I mean, obviously, but the system of governance and democracy and how things happen get in the way of it's a very complex discussion. It's a very, very complex discussion.
And sitting here in the UK, I think we all know a little bit about political instability.
Exactly.
So I can't talk too much, but I want to ask you as well about private equity in Africa. There's a lot of interest in that. Of course, you are at the forefront. How do you see the model for the next generation of private equity investment come?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have African money doing Africa. That's got to be the forefront of what happens. In every other continent, you know, it's US money doing US, it's China money doing China, it's European money doing Europe. Because at least by doing that, you take away a big element, which is currency risk. Currency risk is the biggest eroder of value when doing the kind of investing that we do. So mobilization of domestic capital to create value, create jobs, create infrastructure, and it just does so much more. And that cycle is what we need to try to do. And it's starting. I mean, we forget Africa is a very young population. There's no pension money in Africa. There is money, but what I mean, there's no pension money. The shape of the demographics mean the amount of pension money to come is many, many hundreds of multiples of what we've got today. So it will come, it will happen, but it's not going to happen by chance. Many governments don't allow their pension funds to invest in private equity. And when they do, they say it's only going to be, if they do, it's only in my country. So some regulatory changes need to happen to move it along, but mobilizing domestic capital to invest across the country, which NSI did a lot of, I think has got to be at the forefront of how you can transform the industry, because you take one big risk, the foreign exchange risk.
And of course, not just low, pension money, but also low savings rates. Right?
Correct.
That is a real issue, one that is improving in the right direction, but
correct.
That will need some time to build up.
Absolutely.
Now, the young population, how do you see your investments and your work fit in with one of the big megatrends that we all talk about now, AI? How does that fit in for Africa? Is Africa going to be a consumer? Is Africa going to be a generator?
That's a great question. I mean, we playing two big themes on the sort of young population. One, we're investing in sports and entertainment. It's been mentioned earlier, like, most of the content, sports stars, be it football, basketball, American football, even things like table tennis, music, globally, it's sort of African heritage talent that's there. And the value of the proportion of the value being created across those things, Africa is getting next to nothing. So trying to find ways to capture and create and formalize and ensure that Africa gets a bigger share of that whole sort of young Africans and African diaspora creating content that's entertaining the world, movies, everything. And on the AI side, I think for AI to work, we need to have an African model. I think paying whatever price they pay for NVIDIA chips, or paying, price they're paying for Anthropic and Claude, Africa is not rich enough to afford that. So, but there are many, many models out there. There are, open source models that are an 80th of the cost of compute in doing the same thing. So Africa will get its AI time, but it's not going to be done. I think it's going to be more open source. But the value to Africa of AI, I believe, is going to be dramatically higher than AI in the Western world for many, many reasons. Think of just education. We don't have enough good teachers. You give a teacher an AI tool, the productivity, there have been things that have said that children can gain in a few months, like 5 years of education, just giving the same teacher, but AI tools. Healthcare, no good doctors. Give them AI tools. So just the ability of AI to improve productivity in Africa is going to be. I want just one last point. The period from 2000 to 2010, Africa was growing like 7, 8, 9, 10% a year. I believe what drove it was the direction of the mobile phone. Mobile phone drove productivity, growth in a way that we've not seen in Africa in a long, long time. We had no telephone lines. People spent hours traveling. But nowadays, I think AI is what could provide that level of productivity growth that we got from mobile phones. And Africa has got to have its moment with AI.
I want to bring you both in because, of course, Africa is also home to 30% or around a third of the world's critical minerals, which feature heavily in the supply chains for all the capital spending that we see now for AI, amongst others. So how does that fit into your picture? Is AI going to be a game changer for Africa?
Definitely in education, in health, even in infrastructure overall. It's not said enough, but it has the potential of really impacting those sectors as well. From a Vision Invest perspective, we're planning to invest in digital infrastructure as well. As a matter of fact, we are looking right now at some opportunities on the continent. And also in critical minerals, that will be a new sector for us. But it won't be extracting and exporting. It will have to be partnership on the ground to somehow process, to also invest in the power, in the logistics. We are not just looking at investing in one mine, but to invest in the overall value chain and the overall infrastructure.
Uche, what is your perspective on this?
No, it's quite interesting because the first two investments we made in Vitesse Africa were in artificial intelligence. The first, we co-founded a company called UltraSafe AI, which is actually more of an agentic AI for radiology. So reach CT scan, X-rays, and that's been quite interesting. And I can see how that transforms healthcare in Africa. Because at the moment, we do about 1 million images a month of X-rays and CTs, and that's been quite something that I could see the transformational effect. But the second one we made was a new cloud company here in the UK, which brings up two things. Number one is, everyone is looking at AI in terms of the big infrastructure being built. Nobody's going to build those 10, 15, $20 billion data centers in Africa. That's just not going to work. However, I think you're going to see the evolution of technology differently. You're going to see this becoming more of an edge compute that ends up being more in your devices. That's the direction of things. And at that point, you suddenly find that there's so much more of this large language model that can get stripped down to small language models that you can use in your device. That's where I think it's going to explode in Africa. Okay? And so for now, I think if you think about what Africa can do, When I was at the NSIA, we seeded a hyperscale data center company, which is the first one that was just commissioned in Nigeria, and it's AI capable, but it doesn't yet have the power for AI. We'll get there. But I look at certain countries. Look at Mozambique, for example, right? Mozambique has excess gas, can do 2.5, 3 gigawatts of capacity of electricity that nobody is going to really use that place. Why doesn't Mozambique become a hub for regional AI data centers? We need to start to think about it differently, not just from the point of what we can do as individual countries, but from a regional perspective. There's not enough power in South Africa. Mozambique is likely to have excess power. Then that should be, because I think the most important discussion is this, is who really owns the data? Okay? AI, today, the token cost of moving data across Anthropic or ChatGPT is so high for enterprises. Where enterprises are going is going to be actually AI within your firewall as an enterprise. You buy your own GPU, we implement it for you. Okay? This is how Africa is going to get around this whole thing. So trying to build and race alongside Stargates to build big AI data centers is not a race we're going to. I like the analogy of we're starting at the same point, but we're not all going to be Usain Bolt. That's a great one, because I think we just need to figure out how to define this differently. One last thing. AI, in terms of the ability to write codes, is one thing that, in my opinion, is going to level the playing field very, very quickly. We have loads of coders in Nigeria. You know, it's a company called Andela that train loads of them. But the truth is, right now, we can actually be more productive in terms of being as competitive. So I think the opportunity for us to play in an agentic AI role, where we now start to create tools, we don't have to own the big data centers. It's actually an opportunity today that I expect to see Africa benefit from. But I also see that as a game-changing opportunity in the long run. One last point. The gentleman that, you know, he talked about tokenization. Let me speak about tokenization for 1 second. I think that he made a point, and I don't think we all kind of responded to it as aggressively as we should. That's one technology that I think will unlock wealth in Africa in ways that we haven't yet figured out. Mali has gold mines. They sit there, nobody puts any value on them. The day we take up those gold and tokenize them, it's when we start to see whether Mali is really wealthy or poor. Those are the things, in my opinion, that could be real game changers technology-wise in the future. And I think African governments need to get on this boat as quickly as possible, because fractional ownership is one that, in my opinion, will start to unlock value in a big way. I'll stop here.
Well, it certainly is a topic for game changers where we could go on, but I think our time is pretty much at an end. But I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you $10 billion US. Where would you invest it to game change, where you would like to see the biggest game change? Where would you put that?
In this world, 10 million is nothing, man. 10 million is everything. I mean,
okay, I'll give you 20.
No, as someone said, which is a point actually I read recently, someone said, innovation is not an innovation problem, it's a capital problem. If you think of the amount of money that these companies, tens of billions of capital raise to solve problems, the scale is just, it's incredible. It's incredible. I'm skipping your question, that's what I'm doing.
10 billion nothing, or something for you to interest you in?
I mean, it depends. If it is soft money, I will invest it in project development, project preparation, in researching our mining sector, because we have not received enough money to explore Africa's minerals compared to Peru, to Canada, for example. Yeah.
So there's one gap to be filled, which will be maybe the debate for the next panel discussion. Uche, what about you?
I'm going to say something that just sounds counterintuitive to everything I've said before. I'll invest in basic chemical industries. And I'll invest in that for two reasons. Number one, we've seen, again, I keep talking about this Dangote refinery, but there are still so many things. I'm a chemical engineer by training, so I have to go back to things I understand a bit. But you cannot build an industrialized economy if you're not able to make things like your caustics, your acids, all these basic things that Africa today continues to import. You cannot drive the oil industry if you don't import, if you don't have these things. I still think that is a missing cog in the wheel of what really drives an economy. If you look at all the big economies of the world, at the end of the day, the US has all these big Microsoft and NVIDIA and all these companies. At the end of the day, that is those basic industries, in my opinion, that are still missing. It is the missing middle, in my opinion, where we have a lot of small businesses, a few large businesses, but there's something missing in the middle that I still think is unspoken, unheard, and people cannot really give it all the credit it deserves. But that's really what is the core engine of an economy. That's where I put my money today.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion.
My 10 billion now? Thank you.